school day, and he hasn't been seen since.
The rain had just stopped over Vista, Nebraska. Water still clung to the sidewalks outside the apartment complex, where Ryan Larsen lived with his family. Cars passed quietly through the neighborhood. Kids were still inside classrooms, finishing the school day. Nothing about the afternoon looked unusual. Ryan was 11 years old, tall for his age, quiet around strangers, more comfortable inside routines than outside them. He was autistic, lived with epilepsy, and also had Tourette syndrome. People close to Ryan knew sudden stress, overstimulation, or changes in routine could sometimes become difficult for him to manage. At home, his mother Tammy understood those routines better than anyone. She knew what helped Ryan stay calm. She knew he sometimes became overwhelmed at school, and she knew he had a habit that would later become impossible for people to stop thinking about. Ryan loved hiding. Closets, small spaces, corners most people would never notice immediately. Inside the family, it had almost become part of who he was. And despite the moments where he occasionally wandered or slipped away briefly, there was one thing he's always believed with certainty. Ryan always came home. The Larsen apartment was only minutes from Vista West Elementary School, close enough that the route between school and home felt completely ordinary. That normal routine is part of what makes the case so difficult to understand now. Because on May 17, 2021, the school day initially unfolded like any other. At one point during class, Ryan asked to leave the room for a few minutes. The request itself did not seem alarming. Teachers were familiar with helping him step away briefly whenever he felt overstimulated or needed space to calm down. But this time, something changed. Minutes passed, then more. And somewhere between the classroom hallway and the apartment complex where his family expected him to return, the normal rhythm of the afternoon quietly broke apart. At first, nobody realized how serious the situation was becoming. But within hours, an entire suburban neighborhood would begin searching for a child who seemed to disappear almost within sight of home. And years later, investigators still cannot fully explain where Ryan Larsen went after leaving school that afternoon. By late morning on May 17, 2021, the school day at Vista West Elementary still appeared completely routine. Rain moved on and off through Vista. Students rotated between classes. Teachers continued lessons as usual. Inside one classroom, Ryan Larsen became frustrated during a math assignment and asked to step out for a few minutes. The request itself did not initially seem alarming. School staff were familiar with helping Ryan briefly leave class whenever he felt overwhelmed or overstimulated. According to later reports, short breaks like that were sometimes used to help him calm down before returning. But sometime after Ryan left the classroom, a gap formed in supervision. One staff member stepped away, another had not yet arrived, and during those missing minutes, Ryan walked out of the school building unnoticed. At first, nobody realized how serious the situation might become. This was not the first time Ryan had unexpectedly left school grounds during the year. People around him still believed he would likely be found nearby and safely brought back. But as the afternoon continued, concern slowly began growing. By 12:27 p.m., school officials contacted Ryan's mother, Tammy Larsen. Her son was missing. Then came the sighting investigators would later focus on more than any other. Around 1:45 p.m., Ryan was reportedly seen near the Southfield apartment complex, where he lived with his family. He was carrying a colorful Polka-Dot umbrella. The location mattered because he appeared to be only moments away from home. But, according to investigators, Ryan never entered the apartment. And after that moment, the timeline becomes increasingly difficult to reconstruct clearly. because investigators could still place Ryan leaving school. They could still place him near home, but somewhere inside the short distance between those 2 points, the normal sequence of the afternoon seemed to quietly break apart. At first, many people still believed Ryan would eventually be found nearby. But as the hours passed and the timeline stopped producing clear answers, the disappearance began feeling less like a temporary runaway situation and more like the beginning of something far harder to explain. Within days, investigators would begin uncovering details that only deepened the uncertainty surrounding where Ryan Larsen went after leaving school that afternoon. Within hours of Ryan Larsen being reported missing, La Vista police and volunteer search teams began moving through the area surrounding both the school and the Southfield apartment complex. At first, many people still believed Ryan would likely be found nearby, because the timeline seemed small. He had left school shortly before noon. He had later been seen near home, and according to the known movements investigators reconstructed, only a relatively short window of time remained unexplained. But as the search expanded, that confidence slowly began fading. Officers searched streets, wooded areas, drainage systems, retention ponds, nearby construction zones, and locations Ryan was known to visit or hide in before. Tracking dogs were brought in. Drones and helicopters searched from above. Volunteers moved block by block through neighborhoods surrounding La Vista, and despite the scale of the search, nothing clearly explained where Ryan had gone after the final sighting near the apartment complex. Then came one of the most important discoveries in the entire case. Months after the disappearance, Ryan's colorful polka-dot umbrella was found behind the apartment building near a dumpster. DNA testing later confirmed the umbrella belonged to him. That detail immediately narrowed investigators' focus back toward the area surrounding the apartment complex. Because if Ryan's umbrella ended up there, investigators believed he almost certainly made it close to home that afternoon. But the discovery also deepened the confusion surrounding the timeline. Why leave the umbrella behind? Why was there still no confirmed sign of Ryan anywhere else nearby? And how could such an extensive search produce so little physical evidence connected to where he went next? As investigators continued reconstructing Ryan's final known movements, additional details surrounding his behavior before the disappearance also began surfacing publicly. Authorities later reviewed internet searches connected to Ryan involving hiding, underground spaces, and disappearing. The significance of those searches has remained heavily debated. Some people believe they may support the possibility that Ryan intentionally hid somewhere difficult to locate. Others argue the searches still fail to explain how no trace of him was ever found, despite the scale of the investigation that followed. And that uncertainty became one of the defining characteristics of the case itself, because nearly every major piece of evidence seemed to raise new questions instead of resolving existing ones. The final sighting near home, the umbrella behind the apartment building, the absence of clear surveillance footage after 1:45 p.m., the complete lack of confirmed physical evidence pointing investigators toward a definitive location. Over time, the case slowly became less about a child temporarily missing nearby and more about how an 11-year-old boy could seemingly disappear from a suburban neighborhood without leaving behind a clear explanation for what happened afterward. Years later, the investigation remains open. No confirmed sightings, no verified trace of Ryan after the afternoon he left school. And despite the searches, evidence reviews, and continued public attention surrounding the case, investigators still cannot fully reconstruct the missing portion of Ryan Larsen's timeline, which may be the most unsettling part of the entire investigation even now, because the known timeline feels so small. School, walk home, apartment complex, and yet somewhere inside those ordinary suburban spaces, the case simply stops making clear sense at all. As the years passed and no confirmed trace of Ryan Larsen was ever found, the case slowly divided into competing explanations that each seemed capable of explaining part of the timeline, but never all of it. The theory many people consider most likely is that Ryan hid somewhere near the apartment complex after leaving school and was never discovered. People close to him knew Ryan sometimes squeezed into small, secluded places when overwhelmed. Closets, tight spaces, areas most adults would not immediately think to search. Supporters of this explanation believe Ryan may have hidden somewhere near Southfield. Apartments, nearby drainage areas, construction zones, or wooded spaces surrounding the neighborhood. Some investigators and community members also focused heavily on Papillion Creek. Rain had moved through the area that day. Water levels were elevated in certain locations. And over time, many people began wondering whether Ryan may have accidentally entered the creek and been carried away before search teams fully understood where to focus. Cadaver dogs reportedly alerted in certain areas during portions of the search, but no confirmed remains were ever recovered. And that missing physical evidence remains one of the biggest problems with the accidental death theory even now. Because despite the extensive searches surrounding La Vista, investigators still never found clothing, remains, or any clear location definitively explaining where Ryan went after the final sighting near home. Other people believe Ryan may still be alive. That theory often centers around the idea that Ryan was more independent and capable than outsiders sometimes assumed. He was considered high-functioning. He knew the area around his home. And some people believe it is possible he encountered someone willing to shelter or assist him after leaving school. Over the years, reported sightings and tips surfaced from different states, though none were ever verified conclusively. Still, supporters of that theory point to one difficult reality. Without confirmed physical evidence, investigators cannot fully rule out the possibility that Ryan survived the day he disappeared. Another theory investigators have never completely excluded is the possibility that Ryan encountered another person after being seen near the apartment complex. Not necessarily a dramatic stranger abduction scenario, but perhaps someone Ryan trusted, recognized, or willingly approached. The challenge with that theory is the setting itself. Ryan disappeared in the middle of a suburban afternoon. A populated area, nearby traffic, apartment buildings, businesses, surveillance cameras. And despite all of that, investigators never uncovered clear footage, witnesses, ransom demands, or confirmed evidence strongly supporting an abduction. Some people have also questioned whether Ryan may have suffered an accident connected to his medical conditions after leaving school. Because he lived with epilepsy, investigators considered the possibility that he became injured, disoriented, or incapacitated somewhere before anyone realized he was missing. But once again, the same problem continues surfacing no matter which theory people believe. The complete absence of definitive evidence afterward. And that is exactly why the case continues haunting people years later. Every explanation seems to answer one part of the timeline while creating new problems somewhere else. If Ryan hid nearby and died accidentally, how was nothing conclusively found despite the scale of the searches? But if another person became involved, how did something happen so quietly in the middle of the afternoon without producing clearer evidence? The deeper people examine the case, the more the disappearance seems suspended between explanations that never fully settle the same questions. An 11-year-old boy leaves school. He is seen near home. An umbrella appears behind the apartment building. And after that, the timeline simply stops giving clear answers at all. As the years passed, the Ryan Larsen case became increasingly difficult for people to process for one specific reason. The distance involved was so small. Ryan did not disappear during a cross-country trip. He did not vanish deep inside a forest or on an isolated highway miles from help. He disappeared between school and home. That simple fact continued shaping how investigators, volunteers, and Ryan's family understood the case long after the initial searches ended, because the route itself felt ordinary: sidewalks, apartment buildings, parking lots, neighborhood streets filled with people returning home in the middle of the afternoon. And yet somewhere inside that familiar landscape, the timeline surrounding Ryan's movements stopped making clear sense. For his family, that uncertainty never really settled into a single explanation. There was no final location to mourn, no confirmed answer, no moment where the search truly felt finished. Only a repeating set of questions people continued returning to over and over again. Did Ryan make it all the way back to the apartment complex intentionally? Did he hide somewhere nearby after becoming overwhelmed? Did he encounter someone after the final sighting? Or did investigators somehow miss a critical detail during those first crucial hours? The longer the case remained unsolved, the more those unanswered possibilities seemed to expand instead of narrow. And perhaps that is part of what continues haunting so many people who follow the case even now. Because Ryan did not disappear invisibly. People saw him leave school. Someone reported seeing him near home. Investigators recovered the umbrella. The case contains fragments of a normal afternoon that should connect together cleanly, but they never fully do. That contradiction slowly became the emotional center of the investigation itself. A child visible almost the entire time, yet somehow still impossible to find afterward. Over time, the searches gradually slowed. News coverage became less frequent. Public attention shifted elsewhere. But the unresolved gap at the center of the case never really disappeared. For Ryan's family, every ordinary detail connected to that afternoon remained frozen in place. The route from school, the apartment complex, the rain, the umbrella. Not because those details clearly explain what happened, but because they still feel like they should. And years later, that may remain the most difficult part of the entire case to accept. Not simply that Ryan Larsen vanished, but that he vanished so close to where he was supposed to be safe, without anyone ever being able to fully explain what happened in between.
In order for the Larsen family to pursue their legal rights against the school district, for the negligence of the school district, we think it's a necessary step to go through this proceeding. Well, I think this has been agonizing for the family on a daily basis, and I think they're always going to hold out hope that Ryan will be found and that he's safe. But this family needs closure, and they need to move on to the next step, and they need to enforce their legal rights.
More than 4 years after Ryan Larsen disappeared, the case remains officially unsolved. No confirmed remains have ever been found. No verified sightings have ever clearly established where Ryan went after the afternoon he left school. And despite years of searches, public attention and investigative review, the central gap in the timeline still has never been fully explained. The investigation remains open. Over time, authorities searched far beyond the original neighborhoods surrounding La Vista. Volunteers revisited drainage systems, wooded areas, waterways, construction zones, and locations connected to Ryan's known routines. Tips continued arriving from different states. Possible sightings were investigated. Digital evidence was reviewed repeatedly. But even after all of that, the known facts surrounding the case still narrow back toward the same small stretch of time and distance. A child leaves class. A child walks toward home. A child is reportedly seen near the apartment complex where his family is waiting for him. And after that, the timeline stops producing clear answers. Perhaps that is why the Ryan Larsen case continues affecting people long after the original headlines faded. Because nothing about the setting feels extraordinary. Not an isolated forest, not a deserted highway, not miles of wilderness, just sidewalks. Apartment buildings. Rain moving through a suburban afternoon. The kind of ordinary environment where people assume children eventually make it home safely. And yet Ryan Larsen never did. For his family, the uncertainty has never fully settled into one explanation. No final location. No confirmed understanding of whether Ryan hid somewhere nearby, became injured, encountered another person, or disappeared under circumstances investigators still cannot reconstruct clearly. Only possibilities that continue existing side by side without resolution. Over the years, the case also forced broader conversations about autism, wandering behavior, school supervision, and how quickly vulnerable children can disappear, even in places that initially appear safe and familiar. But beyond all the theories and public discussion, one reality has remained unchanged from the beginning. Nobody has been able to fully explain what happened after Ryan Larsen was seen near home that afternoon. And maybe that is what continues making the case so difficult to forget. Not because the timeline is large, but because it is so small. An 11-year-old boy leaves school during the middle of the day. He walks through a familiar neighborhood. He gets within minutes of home. Then he disappears without leaving behind a clear explanation where he went next. More than 4 years later, investigators still cannot answer the question sitting at the center of the case. What happened in the short distance between Ryan Larsen's school and his front door? Maybe the answer is hidden somewhere investigators already searched. Maybe an important detail from that afternoon was misunderstood from the beginning. Or maybe the truth is something far simpler and far sadder than anyone wants to believe. But until Ryan Larsen is finally found, that quiet suburban route through La Vista will remain one of the most unsettling, unresolved gaps in any modern missing child investigation. Because somewhere between school and home, an 11-year-old boy vanished. And the world still does not know how.